My name is Adeline, and I am 32 years old. I used to believe that childhood memories fade into soft, harmless shadows, but mine never did. They stayed sharp, like glass under skin, impossible to ignore and painful whenever touched. I was 11 when my mother told me to leave. Not yelled, not argued, told with a terrifying calmness that made it feel permanent. I remember the exact way the afternoon light slipped through the kitchen curtains, the smell of burnt toast, the ticking clock that seemed louder than her voice. She didn't look angry. That was the part that haunted me for years. Anger I could have understood, but her eyes were distant, almost cold, as if she had already erased me from her life. She said it was for the best, a phrase that made no sense to a child clutching a backpack and trying not to cry. No dramatic fight preceded it, no rebellious act, no catastrophic mistake. One ordinary day I was her daughter, and by evening I was standing outside our home, watching the door close like the final page of a book I was never allowed to read. For years I told myself there had to be a reason I simply couldn't remember. Children search for logic even in cruelty. I stayed with relatives, then friends, then eventually learned to survive on my own long before I was truly grown. Every birthday felt like a quiet accusation. Every achievement carried an invisible question. Would she care if she knew? But life has a strange way of circling back to the wounds we try hardest to bury. When I was on vacation with my family, I received a strange message. Fly home. Don't say anything to your mother and brother. The words made my stomach tighten. My mother and I barely spoke, and my brother and I were polite strangers connected by blood and silence. The message came from an unknown number, yet it carried a weight that felt deeply personal, almost urgent. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself it was a mistake, some random misdirected text, but another message followed, shorter, colder. This cannot wait. Fear doesn't always arrive as panic. Sometimes it settles as a quiet certainty that something is terribly wrong. I booked the next flight without telling anyone the real reason, inventing an excuse about work, my mind racing through possibilities I couldn't name. During the flight, memories I hadn't revisited in years returned with brutal clarity, my mother's voice, that door closing, the unbearable confusion of being unwanted. By the time the plane landed, my nerves were stretched thin, my thoughts tangled between dread and curiosity. At the airport, a lawyer and the police were waiting for me, and the sight alone felt like the ground shifting beneath my feet. They stood near the exit, scanning faces until their eyes fixed on mine with unsettling recognition. My first instinct was disbelief. People like me, ordinary, unnoticed, are not met by lawyers and officers unless something has gone catastrophically wrong. The lawyer introduced himself with rehearsed gentleness, my name sounding oddly formal in his mouth. The police officer remained silent, watchful, which somehow made everything more frightening. I felt as though I had stepped into a story already unfolding, one where everyone knew the plot except me. My mind leapt to the worst conclusions. An accident, a crime, a mistake tied to my identity. But the lawyer's next words dismantled every assumption I had. He spoke of my mother, of secrets, of documents sealed for decades. Each sentence tightened the air around me, transforming confusion into a slow, suffocating horror. I struggled to process what I was hearing, the world narrowing into fragments of sound and meaning. And after I learned the truth, I lost consciousness. But before darkness claimed me, one devastating realization burned through everything I thought. I understood about my past, my mother, and the day she sent me away. When consciousness returned, it did not come gently. It crashed into me like a wave, dragging confusion, fear, and a crushing sense of disbelief along with it. The sterile white ceiling above me blurred into focus, followed by the faint beeping of medical equipment and the distant murmur of voices. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was or why my chest felt so heavy. Then the memory struck. The airport, the lawyer, his words, and my body tensed as if the truth itself were a physical weight pressing down on me. A nurse noticed my movement and called for the doctor, but their presence barely registered. My mind was locked onto one thought: my mother. The lawyer's revelation replayed in fragments, each piece more destabilizing than the last. My mother hadn't abandoned me out of cruelty or indifference. She had hidden something, something so enormous, so life-altering, that it had dictated the course of my entire childhood. When the lawyer arrived at the hospital later that day, his expression carried a mixture of relief and caution, like a man handling something fragile and explosive at the same time. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if afraid the truth might shatter me again. 21 years ago, my life had been entangled in a legal nightmare I never knew existed. A powerful man, someone my mother had once trusted, had been fighting for control over an inheritance tied to my name. Not money my family possessed, but assets held in trust by my late grandfather, wealth significant enough to attract dangerous attention. According to the lawyer, threats had been made, real ones. My mother had been advised that the safest way to protect me was to make me disappear from every official record connected to her, to sever visible ties, to send me away in a manner that looked like rejection rather than protection. The explanation sounded impossible, like the plot of a thriller rather than the story of my life. Yet the documents were real. The police involvement had been real. Even the decades of silence were part of a strategy, designed to keep me alive. Alive. The word echoed in my mind with sickening intensity. My entire identity had been shaped by the belief that I was unwanted, when in reality I had been hidden, shielded, sacrificed. Rage and grief collided, inside me with violent force. If she had loved me enough to protect me, how could she let me grow up believing I was disposable? How could she watch from a distance while I struggled, questioned my worth, built a life over a wound she had created? The lawyer had no comforting answers, only the cold logic of survival and risk. Contact would have exposed me. Truth would have endangered me. My mother had chosen secrecy over understanding, safety over emotional survival. Days later, I agreed to see her. The decision tore through me with anxiety I could barely contain. When she entered the room, time seemed to fracture. She looked older, smaller somehow, yet unmistakably the woman whose absence had defined my existence. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Decades of pain, confusion, and unasked questions crowded the silence. Then she began to cry. Not the restrained tears of politeness, but the raw, uncontrollable sobs of someone carrying unbearable guilt. She told me everything the lawyer had confirmed, but hearing it from her lips carried a different weight. She had lived in constant fear. Every year, every milestone of my life observed from afar through intermediaries, photographs, quiet updates. She had believed distance was the only barrier between me and genuine danger. I wanted to stay angry. Part of me needed to. But beneath the fury, another realization slowly emerged. Unwelcome, yet undeniable. Her choice had not been born from hatred. It had been born from terror. Love distorted by fear had still stolen my childhood. Yet it had also preserved my future. Forgiveness did not arrive in that room. Nor did reconciliation magically erase 21 years of damage. But something shifted. The narrative of my life, the story I had told myself about being unwanted, cracked open, revealing a far more complicated, painful truth. My mother had not simply kicked me out. She had let me hate her to keep me safe. Even now, the emotions remained tangled, impossible to reduce to simple right or wrong. But one thing became painfully clear. The past I believed I understood had never been the full story. And if this story moved you, if you felt even a fraction of the shock, pain, and emotional storm I lived through, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because some stories are not just told, they are experienced. And the next one may stay with you long after the screen fades to black.